Bonjour à tous. Bienvenue à Série MANIA, bienvenue à l'UGC. Voilà, Série MANIA qui bat son plein. On est vraiment heureux de vous voir si nombreux pour nos nombreuses séances. Ça fait plaisir après tellement de mois et de mois à attendre. Enfin, ces retrouvailles, voilà, de vous voir là. On est là pour une de nos séances parler, comme on aime les faire, c'est-à-dire pas seulement montrer les séries, mais aussi en discuter, mieux connaître leurs créateurs, les coulisses. Et cette année, on est particulièrement heureux et fiers, je dois dire, en particulier avec quelqu'un que je voudrais saluer, tiens, Pam Jackson here. Thank you, because elle a amené Steven Canals ici à Lille. Donc on peut lui dire merci. Voilà. Voilà, Steven Canals qui est vraiment un créateur important d'aujourd'hui. Sa série Pause a marqué tous les esprits, 3 saisons qui se sont donc terminées récemment. Une énorme évolution dans la représentation des personnages transgenres et aussi dans les acteurs transgenres mis à l'écran grâce à lui. Il en parlera évidemment beaucoup. Il y aura des extraits de la série, mais je vais tout de suite laisser la place à celui qui va la modérer. Je voudrais appeler Ronan Cros. Voilà. Ronan est le modérateur du cercle série sur Canal+, et il fait plein d'autres choses dans la vie, mais en particulier ça. Et puis sans tarder, je vais vous le laisser tout de suite et on va faire un tonnerre d'applaudissements pour monsieur Steven Canals.
Bonsoir.
Hi, Steven.
Hello.
So happy to be here. We are so thrilled to have you here. My first question's not going to be a question, but thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much for Pose, for bringing us those characters that we'd never seen on TV before. I guess I speak for the whole audience here. Thank you so much, because you changed the world of television. And we're going to talk about it, but first I wanted to know, this series is ending. It's behind you. How do you felt?
It's bittersweet. You know, it's been such a long journey with these characters. I've talked about this quite a bit publicly, that the kernel of an idea for Pose came to me in 2004. I didn't write the first draft of that pilot until 2014. I pitched it for 2.5 years before selling it to Ryan Murphy and FX Networks. So it's been... These characters have lived in me for a very long time. So this is very writerly, but it feels good to finally release them out into the world, you know, to share them with the audience, but also to allow them to live their own lives. You know, I don't have to be the conduit to express their story anymore. They can go do that on their own.
We're going to bring them back now with the Masterclass. We're going to talk about the show. We're going to see some clips. You're going to tell us some secrets about the show, I hope. We're going to cry, I guess, for the ending. But first of all, let's get to know you better. Do you remember the first time you knew you're going to be a storyteller?
I don't know that I would identify one specific moment. I would say that I was that kid who used to suck the fun out of play. So I used to have a notebook and I would write down storylines for all of my toys, and then I would have my cousins play out those storylines, and they would be like, "Ugh, enough," you know. So there was a lot of that.
You do them
happening.
doing your storylines? You do your cruising?
I would make them do them, yeah, because I'm a Virgo and and we're very inattentive. Yeah, so do this, and you know, so there was a lot of that happening as a child, but. Yeah.
Yeah, you often say that in interview that your teenager years and your childhood years was not to be seen. You wanted to disappear. How did you get to go through this hellish year and becoming such a proud gay man?
That's a big question. That took a really long time. I would say that I grew up in New York City. I grew up in the Bronx. And this was in the 1980s. If you know anything about New York in the 80s, it was a really bleak time for the city. You know, we were dealing with the HIV/AIDS epidemic. We were dealing with the crack epidemic, which was eviscerating my South Bronx community. We were very poor. My parents were in their early 20s when they had me, and so we lived in housing projects, and our whole life was about survival. There was no thriving, very similar to the characters on Pose. And, at that time, I think particularly when it comes to representation, which there really was no LGBT representation at that time. At least there wasn't any that I was aware of, and if there was, it wasn't particularly positive. So it took a really long time for me to step into myself and to feel secure enough to say, I'm queer, I'm part of the LGBT community, and I don't really give a shit what other people think about that. It wasn't really until like yesterday, it really was very recently that I kind of stepped into myself and felt like I don't care what other people think about me. But I think part of it is the internalizing, which happens for, I think, all of us in different ways, but especially for LGBT people, the internalizing of other people's projections of what they think it means to be LGBT. And I think for me in the 80s, that projection was, if you're gay, you're gonna get AIDS, you're gonna die.
Whoa.
That was the thing that really.
And that's why you wanted to not to be seen, because you were afraid of yourself?
I think I didn't want to be seen because I was bullied. I was made fun of quite a bit. As a little boy, it was, stop acting like a girl, right? Then it was stop being a sissy. Then it was stop being so gay. Then it was stop being a faggot, right?
Yeah.
Like that was sort of the trajectory. And so you get to a certain point where you're like, if I just recede enough into the shadows, people are not going to see me.
Yeah.
It like sitting here now in front of you having this conversation and talking about it in a way where it doesn't bring up anxiety, or sitting here wearing this pink jacket, which is very loud.
Fabulous pink jacket.
Thank you. I love it. I got it in Australia.
Let's talk about looks. Yeah.
Australia has wonderful fashions, as does France. This would never have existed.
Yeah.
Even 20 years ago. I'd much rather just wear head to toe black and a hoodie and sort of not be seen and not be heard. And it took a really long time for me to realize that it's really important for those of us who are always kind of pushed to the margins to be upfront and center, to stand very firm in our identity wherever we are, and very loudly, proudly, and unapologetically say exactly who we are.
That's true.
Because we're not going to see progress otherwise.
Movies help you to be who you are, because you are a moviegoer and you stay inside with your mom watching movies all over again. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that as I mentioned, like our neighborhood specifically, I mean, New York was just a war zone in general, but the Bronx where I grew up was it was really bad. And so I think my parents were, I should say my mom. My mom she was okay with me staying inside because it meant that I wasn't going to go outside. And I was a really sensitive child, I was always crying when I was a kid.
It's great to cry, actually.
Well, and my therapist would say something different. But, I as a child, I was always very emotional. And I think that, I was too much of a feeler. I don't know if as a child, how you have a lot of empathy, but my mother always said, you were very empathic. And I think as a result, I was always feeling, if it wasn't my own pain, I was feeling other people's pain. And I think that it was easier to stay inside and just, live through story. And I also think, to be quite frank, the thing that I loved so much about film and television was that it was insight into how other people lived, so.
You're a watcher.
I would say an observer, yeah. Completely, observer of behavior, but also it was, even with hard drama, it felt like fantasy to me. It was oh, that's how other people live, So even if it was just as an example, a movie like Kramer versus Kramer, right, with Meryl Streep and Dustin Hoffman, and they're going through this horrible divorce in New York, and it seems really dramatic and pained. But to me, I thought I would watch a movie like that and think, they have a really nice apartment. Huh. And for me, that felt aspirational. It's it sucks that they have to go through a divorce, but look at where they get to live, you know? And like, that was, for me as a kid, like that, you know, especially living in a 1-bedroom apartment in housing projects, like that was a really big deal.
What was your favorite movies or TV show at that time?
As a really little boy, I loved the Transformers, the animated.
Yeah.
Optimus Prime was my hero. I really truly believed, even though it was a cartoon, I really thought that like Spike in the cartoon from 1984, that he was going to, like that there was a truck that was going to roll up to my apartment and was going to help save and liberate me. Really truly believed that for the longest time. And then in terms of television, I mean, I watched everything. My mom was a really big TV watcher, so she watched Dynasty and LA Law, you know, like all those sort of preeminent dramas in the 80s. So I grew up watching a lot of those shows, and then I liked, you know, like the teen shows like Saved by the Bell.
Of course.
So it really
Grossler. First crush, Marc-Paul Grossler, or not at all?
No.
Thanks for him.
Not really.
And now that you're on TV, how do you feel? Because you love TV, and then you're now on TV. How do you feel about that? The young Steven, how does it feel about it? That you become one of the on TV.
I think it's I think I'm still processing that, to be honest. Like, I think this is one of those questions that anytime people ask me, I always get very emotional. So I'm gonna answer it without crying. I think that for me, when I think about where I'm at in my life and in my career, I cannot help but think about my childhood and all of the people who were living in that environment who didn't make it out. I can't help but think about all the people who still live in that environment and are still working to make it out. And for me, I just can't rationalize, like, how did I manage? Like, how did that happen? Like, how am I the person who managed to make it out? Like, I'll never know. I think I'll probably spend my entire life trying to figure out the answer to that question. But I think the way that I try to resolve it for myself internally is by speaking for all of them through the work.
Yeah. You studied filmmaking at UCLA, right? Screenwriting.
Binghamton University first.
Yeah.
So I went through a cinema program at Binghamton in upstate New York, and then I studied screenwriting at UCLA.
What skills did you learn there? What's the best thing you learned in school?
Nothing. No, I'm kidding.
Right, thank you so much.
Stay in school. What did I learn? Well, I think that I would say... Well,
Nothing, maybe, I guess.
No, I did. I'm being facetious. In college, I would say I learned how to... Well, I don't know. That's not true. I learned about the importance of voice. I don't know that I learned how to use mine, but I knew that voice was important. That we all have something very specific that we want to say, and that's impacted and influenced by all of our lived experiences. So that was definitely, that was key as an undergrad. But I graduated at college in my early 20s. You don't really have the emotional intelligence to at least I didn't, to go out into the world and really pursue a career. So, it took stepping into my 30s. And then I would say at UCLA, what I learned is the importance of having a true passion for telling a specific story. I think in this career, and it's interesting because for those of you who were here yesterday, when Haggai Levi had his masterclass talking about his work, and specifically the upcoming scenes from a marriage, and I think that, and he expressed this as well, it's so hard. This career is a lot of work. It can be really exhausting and draining, and it requires a lot of you. And so it's you can't half-ass it. It's either you're gonna go all the way or you're not. It's you can't sort of
fully committed.
You have to be fully committed. You can't sort of live in the middle. And I think that's what I learned at UCLA. It's if you really want this, then you have to go for it.
It's at UCLA that you discover Paris is Burning.
At Binghamton.
At Binghamton, yeah. How did you feel the first time you saw this classic documentary about ballroom culture? How did you feel? Do you remember the moment you saw the film on screen?
Yeah. Yeah. I was a junior in college, so this is my third year at university. I was enrolled in a class called Film Theory, and it blew my mind. Paris is Burning is Jenny Livingston's landmark documentary that was filmed from 1987 to 1990, and it tracks the Black and Hispanic members of the ballroom community in Harlem, in New York City. And up until that point, I had never seen Black or Hispanic LGBT people on screen. Yeah. And so it rocked my world because Harlem is where both my parents grew up. I'm from New York. And I just had never seen representation like that. And especially, as I mentioned, having grown up in the 1980s in New York City, I was like, oh my God, like we actually existed at that time. And if you've watched Paris is Burning, despite the fact that all these people are poor and they're struggling and they're having to fight through, you know, poverty and crime and disease or illness, they still were really happy. They still had a lot of love. They still found a way to create family and to be united. And that deeply, deeply resonated for me because I thought, oh shit, like I didn't realize that those were things that we could have even in the face of a world telling you, you don't have a right to exist.
That's when you decided to make a fiction about it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Paris is Burning is great, but I guess you have another movie that helped you to shape Pose. It's kind of what a feeling movie. It's Flashdance.
Yes.
So let's talk about Flashdance because it's important to talk about Flashdance. Mm-hmm. Why? Why is such an important movie for you?
Because I'm a gay stereotype. No, I'm kidding. No, I mean, because Flashdance, regardless of how you feel about it, I don't care about its Rotten Tomatoes score. I love them. Like, I grew up loving that film. Like, as a little boy, I think, when did Flashdance come out? 83?
Yeah.
Like 82, 83. You know, you figure I was like 3, 4 years old the first time I saw it. I just remember what it made me feel. And I think it's interesting, actually. I was recently talking to my fiance, and I was telling him something, which is all of the films that I loved growing up that I, to this day, still watch every year, and I've seen them way too many times. For example, like Mike Nichols' film Working Girl.
Yeah, Working Girl, of course.
Like
Melanie
that's another,
Griffiths.
Love that
AirPods.
movie.
Yeah.
You know, another one that has deeply impacted me. But I think I can see what there's a common theme and a thread that weaves all those films together. And it dawned on me after turning 40 years old. I was like, oh my God, I know what the connection is. And the connection is that in all of those films, it is someone who is fighting to realize their dream. And I think as a little kid, as a boy, that message always resonated so deeply for me because I was in an environment where I was like, I just don't want to be here. I don't want to be the person who's stuck in this world. Like there's something bigger out there for me. I don't know how to get there. I don't know what it is. I don't know if I'll ever reach it, but I've got to work to get it. And in all those movies, whether it's Working Girl, whether it's Flashdance, it's all these young people who are like, I have a dream and I'm going to go for it. And there was something about that ambition that was like, you know, it's
really 80s too, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can still find those ambitious stories now, but those films of the 80s, again, regardless of quality, deeply resonated for me. So you see, particularly with Flashdance, if you watch the entire series of Pose, you can see, particularly I think in like the ballroom scenes, whether it's in the finale with Blanca and the rain coming down on her, or Damon's dance in the pilot, you know, you can see the influence of the film. And I'm not even shy about it.
So Pose is the mix between Paris is Burning and Flashdance. We agree about that?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so, and then Pose came, and it came to slay. We're going to watch the first clip. It's the early beginning of the show, and we're going to talk about it. First clip, extrait numéro 1.
They didn't show the best part, which is the ball.
Yeah, you know.
Wait, I have to say something, 2 things about that moment, with that scene, which is, one is, it's interesting because it's the opening of the pilot, and it's funny because I don't think it's indicative of what the show is. Yeah, it's tonally very different from the rest of the show. Yeah. The show is much more dramatic, and that's really light. But the other thing is, I've had so many people ask me, like, why the choice to have this moment open the pilot that doesn't feel real or grounded. And here's the thing, that's a real moment. So we had 7 consultants during the first season, all from Ballroom, part of Ballroom in the 80s and 90s. And that was a real story that they told us, that they broke into a museum in New York and they stole all this finery. And ultimately, they weren't arrested because the museum was worried that if it became public that this break-in happened, that no one would ever loan them art ever again. And so they got away with it.
I'm too good looking not to be seen. That's what Electra said. It's like a mojo for the show. Yeah?
Yeah, I think, well, for her. For
Actually,
her, yeah. I don't know that for the other characters, but yeah.
You often say in interview that entertainment has to be great, but it has to be educational too. So what does this scene teaches us?
I would say that scene, if we really want to deconstruct it, is certainly about the ways that people who are pushed to the margins are forced to be resilient.
Breaking the glass ceiling, actually.
Perhaps. I mean, I would say, I think, sure, that's part of it. I think that it's also, and I think you probably see this more so in the first season with Angel's storyline. Angel, for those folks who haven't seen the show, it's, she's a survival sex worker on the piers in New York. And we know that if you are a sex worker, that is illegal, and so the reality is, we've created a system that disenfranchises folks, so it's impossible for her to go out and get a regular job where she's going to make enough money to survive, and so she has to now do this other job that's very quickly criminalized, right? And so I think here, once again, it's like, in what world would they ever have access to any of those things? They wouldn't, right? And so they have to make a choice, which obviously is an illegal choice, but one that they need to survive. So
you often say in interviews that no is not an answer. Is that what the fierceness, the power of Pose came from? All these no you get?
No, not being, well, that is something that my mother used to always tell me when I was a kid. So my mother, Evelyn, would always say, no is bullshit. Well, not no, actually that's a lie. She used to say maybe is bullshit. Yes or no. You want to have a yes or a no answer. You don't want to live in the maybe. But I think in terms of that, with no, yeah, I mean, I think that it depends on how your brain processes it. And it depends on what the thing is. When it comes to, working in Hollywood in a career, I process no as work harder. So that's sort of that's the way I interpret hearing a no.
What's the most stupid things you heard during the pitching session of Pose?
How long do we have?
Like the top 3, actually, if you want.
There's a show in America that is no longer airing that was on Amazon called Transparent.
Yeah, of course.
And when I was pitching Pose, one of the things that I would often get is, well, explain to us what's the difference between Pose and Transparent. Which is like, if you really listen to the pitch, then, you wouldn't ask that question. I got a lot of, I think people thought they were being helpful, these executives, which they weren't. But I got a lot of, the show is too urban, which in
with
America.
The quote, with the
well, no, like they were saying it very,
straightforwardly, yeah.
very, very straightforward. But I think in America, urban is just coded language for too black.
Oh. Too niche? I read too niche.
Occasionally I would hear niche. A lot of people were very direct, and they were like, there's too many gay people, too many trans people. It just was too much of everything, right? It was too black, too brown, too queer, too trans. It was a period piece. It had everything going against it. And so most executives would say some version of, I don't know where a show like this lives, and I don't know who the audience is for a show like this.
Where did you find the strength to battle against them?
I think it comes with the kit when you're born. Specifically as either an LGBT person or a person of color. So I would say for me, the strength came from specifically my grandmother, who she moved to America from the island of Puerto Rico at the age of 23 with 3 children under the age of 5 and a 4th on the way. And when she moved to America, she worked at a factory. Not knowing any English, she only spoke Spanish. She worked at a factory in Harlem as a seamstress. And that was what she had to do to survive, to take care of these 4 kids. And she made a lot of sacrifices so that my mom and my aunts and uncle would be okay. You know, like she sacrificed so that I could have an existence and a life where I wouldn't have to. So going into a room and sitting with executives, regardless of how problematic they may be, and what dumb shit they may say to me, I come from an environment and a family where I don't feel like I had the option to quit. You know, if she could continue to move forward, then I don't have an excuse to not move forward.
Then came the god of TV shows, Ryan Murphy. Exactly.
Yeah.
Does he have a sound when he comes to the place and then,
Occasionally.
Yeah. I heard that it only took 45 minutes to convince him to do the show. Is that right?
Yeah, but it wasn't, yes. But I mean, if I'm being really honest, he already had planned on creating a show about ballroom.
Oh.
So timing is everything, and I think the universe conspires for greatness. So the reality is that he was working, or had just acquired the rights to Paris is Burning, the documentary, and was planning on creating a show around, I think it was going to be a faithful adaptation, and he was having some difficulties, I guess, breaking the story. And it just so happens that I went out to pitch Pose, and this was literally 2.5 years after writing it. And he heard about it because we're at the same agency. And so he was like, I want to read that script. I want to meet with that writer.
Whoa. It's huge. How did you felt when?
I was really nervous because this was September of 2016. He had just won a bunch of Emmys for The People versus O.J. Simpson. And so I was going in to meet with him when he was like top of his game. You know, like he was coming off of American Horror Story and Glee. He had like all this massive success. And I was like, I think because I had heard so many no's, I felt like I don't have anything to lose. But I also thought there was like a sense of urgency going into it. And so I had to really work to keep myself calm.
So is he cool as we think he is?
Yeah, he's great. He was a great collaborator. I mean, here's the thing. I will say this about Ryan, which is when I met with him, this was one of the things he said to me in that 45-minute meeting. He said, listen, you have an idea for a show about ballroom, and I have an idea for a show about ballroom. And I do not think that Hollywood is ready for two of this kind of show. And so the reality is, if you and I both go out with our shows, one of the two of them is probably not going to make it. And so as opposed to that happening, why don't we just partner and work on this together?
But were you afraid of giving your baby to someone that big?
No, because I went into that meeting with him treating it like a job interview. So I had a couple of questions that felt really important for me to ask of my collaborator, whoever that is. And so it didn't really matter that it was Ryan Murphy. I still asked him those questions. And one of those questions happened to be, why are you the person to tell this story? And I believed him. And so it was enough that at the end of it, when he said, I think we should work on this together, give it some thought and let me know what you think, I thought, I think he's the right person.
Yeah, and you had the most inclusive writer's room ever for a TV show, I guess.
I don't know if ever, but I know that like our show made history because we had not one but two.
Janet Mock.
We had 2 trans women in our writer's room of 5, Janet Mock and Our Lady J.
Yeah.
And I think that's the first time that had ever happened.
Yeah, it was the only way to tell this story, right? To have inclusiveness on the writer's room.
Well, here's the thing. It's like, does it make any sense to me that you have a show about like 5 women who are best friends, and you know, of those 10 writers,
On New York,
8 of them are men? It's like, well, why? What the fuck did those 8 men know about being 5 women who are best friends? You know, so it's important to have representation in the writers' room.
My question may going to be a little bit provocative, but does the inclusiveness have straight people too? Because they have big ego, you know, and they have to get in the, you know.
Let's not lose our audience. Yeah, I mean, well, we had a straight man in our room. So Brad Falchuk, my co-creator, we used to jokingly call him the token straight white man. But he was there, and it was great, you know. And actually really important to have him in the room. I'm not okay, here's the thing. I'm all for representation, and I think we absolutely need to see different types of people at all levels, everywhere, in all professions, not just in Hollywood. But with that said, I think that the beauty of diversity is perspective and experience. And so having Brad in the room as a straight white guy, which, if I'm being honest, I think in the beginning, when I first sold the show to Ryan, I don't know that the first place I would have gone to is like, we should have a straight white guy in the room. But having him there was a godsend. You know, I other than learning a lot about writing from Brad, I think what was beautiful is that he pushed us in areas that like, I am not a straight white man, period. Like, I don't have that experience. And so having him in the room talking from that experience, from his lived experience, it got me to think about things in a new way, which was important. You know, it's like, I can't sit on my high horse about, well, like, I'm such a disenfranchised person because I'm a person of color and I'm also queer. It's like, yeah, and there are other perspectives out in the world, and it's important to hear those. And he had one that had as much value as everybody else's in the room.
So defend straight people, yeah. Let's watch another clip. It's the end of the first episode. It's a scene that you choose, actually, when I talk about it after. It's extrait 2. It's hard not to cry watching this, Why did you choose that scene particularly? Because it's really one of the moving... Actually, I'm going to talk about myself. It's the moment that I fell in love with the show. Why? Why did you choose that scene?
I think that's... Well, no, I don't think. I know. It's my favorite scene in the entire series.
At the first episode,
Absolute
and then done?
Favorite scene. Yeah, it's just that one, and then everything else is downhill. I love that scene. I think because that scene represents to me the ethos of Pose, right? So Pose, at its core, I mean, it's about chosen family, love, resilience, blah, 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 blah. But I think that there is I don't even know if I would say it's an undercurrent. Like, Pose to me is really about motherhood and mothering, like those incredible women, or for the non-binary folks, people who step in to care for others.
It's about caring.
And absolutely. And I think that that's what you see in that scene, right? Is like, you see that enduring power of what the LGBT community specifically has always done for each other. Like, we always step in to lift each other up. And that's what she's doing for Damon. Like, this is a Afro-Hispanic, 24, 25-year-old transgender woman who's taking in a boy who is only 17 years old, who got kicked out of his house for being gay. And she is now serving as an intervention and saying, I'm his mom. She's not that much older than him. She needs mothering still herself. And here she is doing that for him. And I think that truly at the core is what Pose is all about. It's the ways that we all step in to support each other.
Yeah. It's having a great beauty and no one there to see it, Blanca said. It resonates with you, actually, your childhood. And I was wondering, during this speech, who's this scene aims at? To the characters or to the audience nowadays? It's like a pep talk for the soul, actually.
Oh, that's lovely. I probably both. I think it's as much Blanca talking to Helena about Damon as it is about... I mean, we have a lot of monologues on our show. And I think a lot of, Blanca's monologues are to the character and to the audience, And I should be clear, not just the LGBT audience, because I have a lot of straight people who will come to me and say a particular scene really deeply resonated for them.
You're never afraid on the show to be straightforwardly lyrical, emotional. Was it hard to write this emotional monologue?
No, not really. I mean, I think that we were also lockstep with these characters. I don't know. I think it depends on the storyteller. Like, being emotional on the page is not hard for me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, being funny is difficult, but being emotional is not. So,
but Pose is about family, and we start the show with Damon, but then in season 2, it's way more about Blanca. Why did you choose to start the show with Damon and not Blanca, actually? as a main character?
Well, I think that the show is always about Blanca. I'll just push back against that a little bit and say that, I mean, she's the first person we meet, right?
Yeah.
Like at the very beginning of the pilot, her diagnosis, discovering that she's HIV positive, is really the thing that launches the entire series. So it isn't by chance, spoiler alert, that you begin and end the entire series with her.
Yeah, but Damon is the way we enter the world of ballroom culture, and why did you choose? Because I was wondering if he's
Damon's only purpose was really just to, I shouldn't say only purpose, it's horrible, but Damon's purpose is to serve as the eyes and ears of the audience who are going to be new to the world. So for most people, I'm assuming they probably hadn't seen Paris is Burning or did not know anything about the ballroom community. So having Damon there is really just a way to say he can ask all the questions that the audience is wondering.
Invite everyone to the party?
Yeah.
And let's have a Sophie's Choice question. Who's your favorite character?
Blanca. Oh, that's not hard.
Okay.
Yeah.
And which one is you, actually?
Blanca.
Perfect.
In the writer's room, we always joke around we all had characters that we tracked.
Yeah.
We tracked those characters narratively, but also we would joke around and say, like, you're that person. This is being filmed, so... Well, I'm going to say it anyway. So, like in the writer's room, we would always say that like Janet Mock is Angel. We would say Ryan Murphy's Electra. But he would admit that. And then everyone would always say I'm Blanca. So,
what do you have in common with Blanca? The motherhood, the careness?
Sometimes. No, I'm very protective. And like once you're sort of in my network or circle, and like I said, I'm a Virgo, so I give a lot of unsolicited advice. That's my love language. But I get very protective of like my people, and I think that in the way that like you see Blanca like literally grab Damon and pull him into the school by the ear, like I think I'm that person. It's like you're not living your best life. Here's what you need to do. Go do it. And sometimes it's a little extra, but I'm always right. So.
Let's talk about MJ Rodriguez. She's amazing.
My favorite.
She's a goddess in the show, actually. How did you meet her?
Through casting. So we worked with, on Pose, we worked with Alexa Fogel, who is a casting director of a couple of shows in the States, Atlanta with Donald Glover, and The Wire, which was on HBO. And I always cite The Wire because on that show, she did for them what she did for us on Pose, which is that she found untapped talent, right? She found folks who just hadn't been given an opportunity before. And so she spent 6 months going into the ballroom community, just basically scouring New York City and finding really incredible Black and Hispanic transgender people who had either never acted before or had been acting but had never been on television. And she sent us a bunch of tapes. I think we received like six to 8 tapes per character. Oh. And at the time, though, there were only 3 trans women on the show. So it was Blanca, Angel, and Electra. So Lulu and Candy hadn't been created yet. So we watched about 6 to 8 tapes for each one of those 3 women. And then after we watched them, we sort of decided who were our top 3. And then the top 3 for each character is who we met in summer of 2017 in New York City.
You work as MJ on the 3rd season and the evolution of these characters. How was the ending with her to say goodbye to the characters?
Very emotional, a lot of crying.
For you, for her?
Like privately, but not in front of anybody, because that's not my style. But in terms of the cast, it was very emotional. It was hard for them to let go. I think that without tears, for me, it was difficult to let go as well. And I think part of it is that so much of our lived experience was put into these characters and was put up on the screen, right? So like for me, when I watch the show, I don't see a single false note, even in the moments that feel really elevated, even in the moments that feel too fantastical. I'm like, nope, because I know the conversations that we were having in the writer's room, and I know the conversations that I've had to have with the cast before we go to shoot a scene. So for me, I'm like, every single moment, even if that's not my personal experience, I can watch a scene and I can say, but I know that that deeply resonated for Dominique, or that really resonated for MJ. And so I think what was hard for all of us to let go was that, will we ever have another professional opportunity where we are literally pouring all of our being into either the page, you know, or for the cast on screen?
It's time for a good read.
Okay.
Extrait 3, Electra is, you know, you're going to see it. It's a pure crowd pleaser, actually.
Oh, Electra. I did not write that, so I can't take credit
Who wrote
for it.
that?
I don't remember. I just know that
Someone
I did
great,
not.
yeah.
I did not.
The show directly tackles the 80s white bourgeoisie. And you were during the presidency of you-know-who, actually. Were you sometimes writing the show as a catharsis of what you were living in America?
I think so. You know what's really interesting about you asking that question? So, we'll say his name. So
it's like Voldemort in a way.
Trump actually announced that he was running for president as we were working on the first season. And he was going to be a character in season 1 of Pose. You know, because the show is always sort of grounded in what's happening socio-politically in New York, depending on what year the season takes place. And the character that James Vanderbeek plays, Matt, in the first season, was supposed to be Donald Trump.
Not played by him, actually.
We hadn't cast the role yet. So I don't know that James Vanderbeek would have played Trump, but it was supposed to be Trump. And then we ended up, after he decided to run for president, we were like, oh, he doesn't need any more attention. So we changed the character. But for sure, I think that having his awful administration definitely impacted scenes like that, you know, which obviously, I mean, here's the truth, right? In the US, I don't know what the stats are globally, but in the United States, Black and Hispanic trans women have a life expectancy of 35 years old. And so when you hear a stat like that, it makes the advocacy for trans people that much more important and that much more urgent. So I think a scene like that, where like it's funny and it's a kiki and you know everyone sort of laughs about it, the reality is like there are so many trans women who have experiences of discrimination like that where they don't make it out alive, right? So a scene like that on a show like Pose, where it's funny and it's, you know, it's obviously very elevated, the importance of that for trans people in the community to see it is to know, oh, I have the agency to use my own voice. You know, like I can stand up for myself.
Like a weapon.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about Dominique Jackson. She's amazing in the show, but she started the show as a villain, actually. But then she's
I wouldn't say she was a villain.
She was
an antagonist to Blanca,
okay,
but I don't know that she was a villain.
She may be like the evil queen from the Pose things, but then she's becoming like a real great and good character. It's like you refuse having opposition between the ballroom community. Why did you choose not to have inner enemies inside the community? They don't fight each other, actually.
Because I think okay, here's the answer to that question. The first season of the show, one of our consultants was the late grandfather Hector Extravaganza, who was part of the House of Extravaganza. And Hector, you know, he lived, I think, to 61 maybe or 62, and he passed away. He died just after our first season aired, which was heartbreaking for me because growing up, I never had a grandfather. And, you know, the first time he and I ever met, he was like, "You're my grandson." So, and I adored Hector so much. And we, during the first season of the show, had a lot of conversations. Like, I was always calling him, sometimes just to talk. And he was great. And one of the things that I asked him it was right when I started writing the first season, I was like, what ultimately, like, if there's just one thing, what do you want Pose to be about? What do you want it to say? And he started crying on the phone, and he was like, I just want the world to know that ballroom is family. That's all I want to know. And so I always kept that in the back of my head. So to me, it's like, again, like, you know, part of ballroom is like, sometimes people are shady with each other, and sometimes they can be really critical and judgmental, but it's always going to be love, because it's always family, right? And so I think that's why a character like Electra was never going to be like an arch villain in that way, because in reality, like, she's still part of the community, she's still family.
But was it really harder than to write a show without any real antagonist?
I think that there was an antagonist. It just isn't a physical form. So I think the looming HIV/AIDS, well, not even looming. I mean, the HIV/AIDS is literally just eviscerating the community.
Yeah.
You know, like, you see so many characters get diagnosed, you see characters die. I think that to me felt like that was the ticking clock, but also that was really the antagonistic force. That, and also, dealing with being oppressed, dealing with issues of class,
So it's a transition, because we're going to talk about the act up theme in the show. It's extrait 4. You're going to see. It's about act up. You got to put your pain in good use. This sentence is really powerful. How does it resonate with you?
Well, I think that especially for LGBT people, but I think also I would say for people of color as well, more often than not, our narratives, our stories are rooted in our trauma. And we so rarely are the ones at the table telling our own story. It's usually someone else telling our story for us. And so I think that line in particular is just a reminder that we have agency, We get to make our own choices.
How did you work with Billy Porter on that part of this character? Because, the storyline of Pray Tell is really moving, and how did you work with him? How did you help him to go through the characters and what he's having?
Billy's great because he's such a professional. He's been doing it for so long. And I think that he was someone who, he wasn't the actor that was like, and what's the next storyline going to be? And let me pitch you ideas. And he really was like, I trust you all to tell the story. I just need to be the vessel. And I think the thing that really no one knew up until just a couple of months ago when he disclosed it publicly is that Billy was diagnosed with HIV in 2007. And I think that he had only really told, until he publicly talked about it a few months ago, he'd only told, I think, like five or six people in his life. And I happened to be one of those people. He told me when we were filming the pilot, and it's the one and only time we ever talked about it. And I was always hyper aware when we were working on the show. After Pray Tell finds out that he's HIV positive, and a lot of the storylines, especially like this last season, now that I think about it, I probably should have checked in with Billy, but I never did. I always felt like he disclosed this information to me, and if he wants to talk about it, he'll say it. So we always wrote the show, like we wrote the show as we did, and I always felt like if he had a concern or wanted to push back, that he would say something, and he never did. And I think in talking to Billy after we wrapped the show, the thing that he said to me is, I always felt like I had a hard time resolving the fact that I lived, like I was diagnosed with HIV and I managed to be okay. I'm married and I have a great life and now I have an amazing career. And I think, again, he just always felt like I just need to be the vessel to tell the story of all the people who didn't.
Pray Tell was the catharsis for him, in a way?
Very much so.
I guess for me, Pose is the new Angels in America.
It's a big compliment.
Because of the mix of dreams and fiction and politics. The play has an influence on you, actually. So do you remember the first time you read or you watched Angels in America?
It was the Mike Nichols HBO adaptation. That was my first encounter with Angels in America. And I remember I was like, 23 or something when it came out. And I just remember sitting in my bed, like weeping while watching it and being so deeply moved by it and feeling like I didn't have anybody to talk to because I think I might have still been closeted at that. I don't think I had come out yet. So I didn't even feel like I could share what it was doing to me.
Angels in America has a lot of fantasy in it, and you had to in Pose. How did you find the balance between historical facts, fiction, and lyrical fantasy?
I think on our show, we always just wanted to root the story in the truth. So even in those fantastical moments, it's like, what's the real root of the emotion that we're trying to express through this particular scene or through this character or through this storyline. So for me, it was just like, regardless of how big it is, like there has to be something that the audience can like grasp onto that's real emotionally.
Have you seen It's a Sin from Russell T Davies?
I have, yeah.
What do you think about it?
I thought it was beautiful, and I've told him so. I thought it was great, and the thing that we were talking about this earlier, what I love so much about it is that once again, it's another. It's interesting what I'm about to say because I don't think of myself as a historian, but to me, like
you are in a way with Pose. You did history actually.
I think we reframed history, and I think that's what Russell T Davies did with It's a Sin. Like he once again reframed it, because the reality is, if you go back and you look at most film, and I'm not going to say TV, but most film about HIV/AIDS, it's always from the white cisgender gay perspective, and more often than not, it tends to be it's New York. It's always the character dying at the end of the story. So it's always. I guess
you speak about Philadelphia, no?
Say it again.
Philadelphia, the movie with Tom Hanks.
Yeah, that's a great example. That's Philadelphia, not New York, but it's kind of hits the same beats. And so, I felt like what Russell did in his show and what we do on Pose is like we just took that spotlight that's always firmly shining in one direction, and we just moved it 15 degrees and said there was like a whole other group of people who are having an experience during that time as well, and their story deserves to be told just like this group whose story you've told 100 times.
You made your character fighters in Pose. That's a bunch of fighters. How did you shape them as fighters? Because throughout the whole 3 seasons, they really fight against like an invisible enemy, but it's like a war thing in the show.
That wasn't. Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I don't know that was an active choice. I don't know that we went into it saying like every character has to be a fighter, so much as these characters have so much coming against them, like they really have to navigate very tricky waters. And I mean, it's a television show, and no one's going to be interested in watching a television show where your characters are being reactive, right? Like what makes television interesting is to have proactive characters. So, if they're fighters, it really is just a function of it's a television show. I don't know that every single LGBT person is going to be militant, fist in the air, fighting for liberation like our characters, but on this particular show, it was important to represent them that way.
There's fighting, there's surviving in Pose, and let's watch another clip. It's like a ballroom scene, and it's a tribute to one of the greatest singer ever. Let's watch Extrait 5, and I guess it's a treat for us. To quote like a famous song, "This is America."
Yeah, I mean, it's a version of it. I mean, that was obviously...
This is the America we need, actually.
Perhaps. I mean, the second season was much more political than the first.
Yeah.
I think if you go back and you watch the first season of Pose, like we took big swings, obviously, narratively, but, it was a feel-good family drama. And I think our second season is when we had, obviously we introduced ACT UP, and we show much more of the politicization of being queer in New York in the 90s. And that moment felt important. Specifically, it's Whitney Houston's version, which is, at least, again, I don't know if this resonates globally, but in America, like when you talk about who is like the sort of preeminent voice that has sang the national anthem, like most people will go to that moment with Whitney Houston. Like it was such a big deal in the States, like when she sang it live and it was released as a single, which was crazy. And the fact of the matter is that we know what the foundations of our country is, right? Like it wasn't built to include us. So to have this trans woman in the middle of a ballroom lip syncing this song. It just, for us, like we knew exactly what we were doing in making those choices.
How did you work on the musical number in the show? How did you shape them? You wrote them. How did you?
It depends on what the scene is, and it really depended on the scene. So sometimes we would talk about it in the room, and then we would say it definitely has to be this song, and we would put it into the script. Sometimes we kind of would leave, depending on the scene. Like I'd leave it up to you to decide what song you felt was right for the moment. And then we worked really closely with Alexis Martin Woodall, who was one of our executive producers, and she supervised our post-production. And she's just like kind of a Rolodex of music. And so she was always really great about saying, I think this song would be really good for this moment.
If we talk about song, we have to talk about Madonna and the Vogue episode. Do you know if she's seen the episode about Vogue?
I don't know if Madonna saw it. She had to approve us using the song.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful that she said yes, but I don't know if she watched the episode.
Yeah, and in this particular episode, you talk about the mainstreamization about ballroom culture. And with your show, with RuPaul Drag Race, in a way, too, we have a way more mainstreamization about ballroom culture. Do you think it's great? Do you think such a political and underground culture can be mainstream? And does it really have the same meaning when everyone gets it?
Well, I think to take what you're asking a step further, I think that the critique around, whether it's Paris is Burning or Madonna's song Vogue, is that at the time, as we've shown on Pose, you had all these people who were, again, fighting to survive, like no one was thriving. Everybody was just like living day to day. And you had all these people who were coming into their community, lifting parts of it, using it, and then they weren't giving back to the community at all, right? So I think that was kind of the biggest issue, right? Is like you came in, you colonized this community, appropriated their culture, and then you never gave them any shine or resources, monetary or otherwise. And I think that was always the biggest issue. It was one of the things that we talked about quite a bit when I was in college about ballroom and ballroom culture. And so we, being myself, Ryan, Brad, like our entire executive producing team, like we really wanted to do better, And so on Pose, like in the ballroom scene, I would say like 95% of our background actors, and every ballroom scene had anywhere from like 125 to 150 background actors. I would say about 95 of those young people are actually from ballroom. And they were all being paid. They were all being compensated to be there as background actors. So, Pose wasn't just about coming in and like taking their narrative and putting it up on screen, but it was also a way to give back to the community.
3 seasons, and that's all. You wish you had more?
I feel like
there's a yes right there.
I feel like I told the story that I set out to tell.
Yeah.
I don't know that any writer. I don't know any writers who go into a project saying, I know, this is exactly how much time I need to tell. So I sort of let it be open, and it, I happened to tell the story in 3 seasons.
In the ending of the show, we have like a new generation that's coming to the ballroom. So we're all waiting for Pose Next Generation.
Okay. Yeah, I mean,
it's a pitch, actually.
Love that. Thank you. You should write it. No, I think I'm not open to it. I think the thing for me is that, and I know the writers here, this will resonate with them, which is, like, I feel like I've explored the world, and all the themes that I want to tease out of that, like I told that over the course of 3 episodes, or 3 seasons rather. So if I was going to dive back in to whether it's picking up with Blanca 15 years after the end of the finale, whether it is talking about the new house, there has to be new themes that I'm going to be investigating.
But when you see shows like Generation on HBO, like really fierce, really queer, do you feel like the mother to them with your show?
No. I really love Generation, by the way. I think it's great.
You helped to prove that it could be possible on TV.
I don't think that Pose alone did that, though. I'm not that egotistical. I think that we all have been working in tandem. So I think, Pose, along with It's a Sin, along with RuPaul's Drag Race, along with, Generation, I think that it's been a slow, steady ride, but I think that we all kind of have been working together.
Yeah, but when you see Billy Porter being like in the upcoming Cinderella movie, the fairy godmother, when you see MJ Rodriguez casting on big TV shows, when you see India Moore on the cover of magazines, how do you feel? It's up to you.
It's great. I mean, I'm all for more visibility.
Yeah,
I think it's important.
It's thanks to you. It's thanks to your work. Do you feel what you have accomplished like a revolution on TV with that?
Well, that's a complicated question. And I'll tell you why. Because I think if you're looking at the current television landscape, again, specifically in the US, I don't know that there's been that much progress in the 4 years since I sold Pose. You have, every year GLAAD does this report, and, we're seeing more LGBT characters on television, sure, but Pose is wholly and uniquely specific, right? We have not one, but 5 trans women of color, all in series regular roles, and the main character, the first person on our call sheet is MJ Rodriguez, who plays Blanca. I don't know any other shows that are doing that. So I think if you look at the landscape right now in the States, we're still being relegated to the supporting character. We're still the best friend, we're still, where are we being centered? And so I think it's great to get a lot of kudos, and this is why it's always really hard for me to receive the accolades and the attention for what Pose represents, because it's not fun to be the only. And at this point, I'm like, we're kind of still the only. Who else is doing that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm waiting. So I think, come back to me when there's more content on television.
Let's talk about the future, and the future is close. The Emmy Awards. So you're fully nominated. You're going to have it. Actually, I know you're going to have it. Okay. So have you already done your acceptance speech? And if you do...
For what category? No.
Have you done it? And if you could mention Lille in your acceptance speech, that would be great.
Done.
You promise?
Promise.
It's about... Okay. So, okay, it's done. It's tape. What are you working on right now?
So it was a slow process coming off of Pose, but I'm working on 2 new things. One I can't talk about. The other one...
Oh, the one you can talk about. I want to hear about it.
Okay. I'll tell you later. The one that I can't talk about is genre. So it's very different from Pose. It's horror, but it's an allegory, my way of investigating generational trauma and the way that we pass our hurts and our sins down from one generation to the next.
Okay, and the other one? Okay, so it's time for the question for the audience. Si vous avez des questions, c'est le moment. Et il y a un micro normalement qui devrait se balader. Le micro, s'il vous plaît, il arrive. Maybe you're going to talk later about the secret project, I guess.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Question ici. Allez-y. C'est ici. Vous pouvez poser la question en français et je la traduis. Allez-y. On vous entend, cela dit. Posez-la, vous entendez à peu près. Oui.
Hi, Mr. Canales. Hello. I would
Allez-y.
I would like to ask you, many scriptwriters around the world admire the quality of American TV series. Based on your own experience, do you know if there are ways, or do you have any advice for foreign scriptwriters, especially French scriptwriters, who wants to go and work or even study scriptwriting in the United States? And I know that a person needs a green card to work in the United States, and it's how difficult it is to get it.
So, any advice for a French
writer who wants to work specifically in the U.S.?
Ouais.
That's an interesting question. I mean, my first gut reaction is to ask, why are you interested in writing in the U.S.? Because I think that you obviously have a lived experience here in France. And so I think what's going to make your work special is you writing from a place of knowledge, right? And so as opposed to having to research, America and American ways, it's like, tell me your story about what it means to be living in France, like that has value as well. I think beyond that, though, like if you're like, nope, I want to go to America, that's where I want to be, that's where I want to tell story, I would say whatever is the specific type of story that you want to tell, just do lots and lots of research in that area. Talk to folks who have lived that life and make sure that it's similar to Pose, right? Like I've never walked a ball. I'm not part of the ballroom community. I have a love and a reverence for it. And so I understand what it means to live in New York City. Like that was easy in terms of the story, but in terms of understanding ballroom, that's why we had 7 consultants. It was important for me to have conversation with them and to really understand what it means to be part of that community.
Great.
I hope that's helpful.
Une autre question. Je vous vois me faire coucou, mais je n'ai pas de micro. It's right up there.
Someone was up there voguing.
Vous ne le voyez pas, mais effectivement, ça voguait.
Which your favorite house?
On the show?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Evangelista, for sure. They're the heroes.
And in the real life?
Ooh, I'm not stepping into that landmine.
Why?
They're all great.
Okay.
Une autre question. C'est en bas. Ah, à côté, pardon, il y avait une question à côté. Ça arrive.
Are you doing a casting in Europe for Pose?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
The casting, they're waiting for it.
Yes, if you maybe a day gonna make a scene here in France, I will maybe make a casting for French people.
Perhaps, maybe. I mean, the show obviously has wrapped, so.
But you're still going to work with transgender people, transgender actors for your next...
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yes, absolutely. It wouldn't be for Pose, but yeah, I mean, of course, I think my work will always center LGBT people, people of color, women. I don't think it's by chance that that's what you see on screen in Pose.
Thank you.
Une autre question, et c'est en bas.
Hi. First of all, thank you for your show and for your screenwriting, because I think it's you don't realize it, but you're in France, and in France we don't have anything like that represented on TV. And for example, RuPaul's Drag Race isn't in France right now because distributor just declined
it's
it.
on Netflix
because
in France. RuPaul.
There are no community in France for watching show like that. So thank you, because you see, all the people here are here for you and for your show and for a story like that. So first of all, thank you. And second of all, this is my question. And the first season, this is more, like you said, a family kind of storyline. And at the beginning of the second season, we begin to enter in a more political way in what you want to talk about. Is it a choice you made for have a more large public and more impact on a for example, white people who are, don't know about what is it to be in the LGBT community. Was it for that, or was it because after the first season and after the main event that create, you decide to
Jump in.
drop some political stuff inside it to make it more clear?
So the first season of the show, there was a lot of fear because we'd never seen a show like this on television before, really ever. And again, I'm not sure, I'm going to make an assumption that maybe here in France is very similar to America in the following way, which is most marginalized communities, you don't get to just represent yourself. You're representing the entire community. So if I go out into the world and create a show about LGBT people and that show doesn't do well, it's not Steven's failure, it's the LGBT community's failure. And so the likelihood that a network or a studio is gonna pick up the next idea, probably not gonna happen. You know, that's historically what's happened to people on the margins. And so I was hyper aware of that going into the creation of the show. And I think it created a lot of anxiety in the beginning. And so I don't think it's by chance that all the grit under the nail that you see in our subsequent seasons, that you don't really fully we didn't go all the way there in the first season. I think in the first season, what we felt was, let's bring the audience in, let's invite them into our home, let's have a conversation with them, and then once they stay, then we'll hit them with all the information, you know? And so that really was the choice that we made. And so it's not by chance that then going into the second season, we were like, and now we can be really political. Now we can hit you with all the difficulties of what it means to exist in the world as a LGBT person in New York in the 80s. That was all very intentional. The other thing I will say to answer your question is that during the second season of the show, in a span of 4 days, 3 Black transgender women were all murdered. And that happened just as we had finished writing the 3rd episode of the second season. And so it created even more urgency for us moving forward during that season. It's the reason why we have the candy episode in the second season. You know, everything for us was always a response to what was actually happening out in the real world. And I think the conversations that we had to have in the writer's room is, do we allow this show to continue to be Disneyland, or do we lean all the way into the reality? And while the reality may be ugly and it might be uncomfortable and you might not want to have that conversation, the reality is if we don't engage each other in that conversation, then we're never going to see any progress. So.
Une autre question.
Hi, Steven. Thanks again for being here and for such a brilliant show. As a huge fan, of course, streaming is fine, but I'm hoping to have someday maybe a pack edition with collector pack on Blu-ray of the show, the 3 seasons with documentaries behind the scenes. Is it something that we can hope for one day to have?
You know, that's
Merchandising.
I've had a lot of people ask that question. I would love it. That's way above my pay grade. I don't know who makes I guess maybe it's Disney. I don't know who, the folks who own the show are the ones who really get to make those decisions. If you put it on Twitter, I will retweet it.
Une autre question. Je ne sais pas où est le micro. Le micro arrive. Ah, il était là.
Hello.
Désolé.
Sorry. Thank you for the show of Pose.
Thank you.
And I was wondering, why do you think there is not any new show about this theme right now? Do you think there is still fear, like you were talking about, like murders or things like this, which could still afraid a little bit the writers, even though Pose is really groundbreaking and has, to me, opened a path for this kind of representation?
Well, I mean, I have 2 responses. One is that there is a show about ballroom on HBO Max called Legendary, but that's a reality show.
It's
a reality competition show. But if you're like dying to see more ballroom, you can watch Legendary.
We don't have HBO Max.
Or you
here.
can illegally download it. And in terms of why there aren't other shows, like scripted shows about it, I mean, I think the reality is that like Hollywood's sort of scope is very narrow. And the reality is, I would imagine that most people, if they have scripts or pitches that exist in the same world, they're probably being told, well, we already had Pose, so why do we need that? Mind you, this is acknowledging that we have 50 cop shows, 50 shows about doctors, 35 shows about lawyers. You know, LGBT people, you get one show, you're good. So we'll see another one in like 10 years.
We need very much more of this one.
I agree. No, I agree. And I think, you know, it's disappointing. You know, I think that the most that I can do is I can control sort of my own, you know, my own plot of land, if you will, meaning all the things that I continue to create or projects that I attach myself to or work on, then I have to make sure that I continue to show representation of the community. You know, like that's my responsibility moving forward so that we don't continue to be erased.
Une autre question, je ne sais pas où est le micro. Il est par là, je ne sais pas. Il y a des gens qui vous pointent du doigt. Il arrive. Yeah. You're going to be the next one.
Hello.
Surely.
Hello, Steven. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So I think that your category is love and hope.
Oh,
Okay.
Thank you. Sweet.
And I've got one question. I come from Africa, West Africa, and I want to know if in the future you will have the idea to make a documentary about the LGBT African community because it's very important for her in the future.
Yes, I mean, that would be, I think it's important, and I think that I would love to see that. I think similar to the question earlier, like my initial gut reaction is why should I be the person to tell that story, right? Because I'm assuming that there have to be African-identified LGBT people who could tell that story better than I could.
But,
you know, so I think that
I understand.
You know, I just would need to find like what's my entryway into the story to tell it, because I don't want to be the person who steps in to tell someone else's story for them. You know, it's all the things we've been talking about here.
I understand, yeah, because you know, I've got some friends in Africa who are very, very fan of Pose, and you are very known in this continent. You know, it's why I think it will be a good idea.
Yeah. No, I'm totally open to it. And maybe the way to work it is to partner with, you know, partner with a young African filmmaker who has a desire to tell that story, you know, and aid them in creating a platform to tell it, you know. I don't know that I should be the sole person to do it, is what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you for
your
answer. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Mademoiselle en bleu, c'est à vous maintenant. Yeah, it's up for the girl in blue. She was waiting for it.
Okay, c'est pas grave. Hi. I was wondering if during the process of writing or even shooting, did you think that your show and your story and how you wrote it would have such a great impact, not only on an American audience, but also on a French audience and worldwide? And did you think, and did you want it for the third season to be so emotional and touch people so much through the stories of Electra and Pretel?
I've always said that for me, the greatest compliment anyone can give me about my work is it made me cry, specifically as like a drama writer. So I think that's great. You know, like it wasn't my specific intention. Like I don't necessarily go into writing something saying this is going to make people cry. I can't control that. But to know that it impacted people that way is amazing. And the first part of your question was around the global impact of the show. It is shocking to me, to be honest. Partly because I think I still had in the back of my head all the voices of all the people who said the show wouldn't resonate in that way. So the show goes out into the world, and first the critics were like, oh, it's actually pretty good. And then an audience started watching it, and they're like, I really loved it, you know? And I'm like, like people are watching and they're really enjoying it. I've traveled internationally to talk about this show. I'm here in France now. I've been to Auckland, New Zealand. I've met folks in Australia. Like it is, and the thing is that ballroom is global, right? Like the ballroom community is everywhere now. You know, it started in Harlem, and then it expanded to these urban centers in America, like Atlanta and Chicago and Detroit. And now it's, you know, it's everywhere. You know, there are houses here in France, there's houses in Germany, there are houses in Australia. It's crazy. So I still pinch myself that the message of the show has been received in the way that it has. You know, it's, you know, and being told like my category is love and hope is lovely, because I think that that was always the intention, right? Like I think for me, my work, I always wanted to serve as a balm to all of the negativity that we see out in the world, because there's so much of it, right? And I think that my commitment is to my community. So, you know, and in this particular case, by my community, I mean LGBTQ plus people, you know, and it's like, I don't really care what everybody else thinks. I don't care what everybody else says. The reality is like the stakes are very high for us. You know, as I just pointed out, it's like every single day, LGBTQ people have to be confronted with racism, homophobia, transphobia. You know, it's like, it's the amount of, you know, stuff that we all have to deal with on a daily basis is a lot. You know, and so if by having this show out in the world, it means that you can hold your head up just a little bit higher, then that's pretty incredible to me.
On va terminer là-dessus. Thank you so much, Stephen, for this talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.